They thought Claire Reynolds was at home crying. In reality, she was buying a $10,000 dress and hiring the best private investigator in the city. The young woman in scarlet red, clinging to Arthur Bennett's arm at the Grand Imperial Club, didn't know 3 crucial things. First, that Claire had orchestrated every detail for her to be there that night. Second, that the flash drive in Claire's Hermes bag contained photos of Lauren with 2 other married men in the last 6 months. And third, most importantly, that in 30 minutes, Lauren would leave that gala ball crying like a child, while Claire would become the legend the NYC high society would tell for the next 50 years. Arthur thought he was trading a boring wife for a luxury inflatable doll. Lauren thought she was conquering a Prince Charming. Neither of them imagined they had just awakened a queen. And queens don't forgive. They destroy with style. The September night at the Grand Imperial Club was steeped in ostentation and fakery. Baccarat crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over the main ballroom, where the cream of New York society gathered for the traditional gala ball of the Hope Foundation. The air conditioning kept the environment at a perfect temperature, in stark contrast to the suffocating heat of hypocrisy that hung among the guests. Arthur Bennett adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. At 38, the real estate entrepreneur had built an empire that guaranteed him a constant presence in society columns. But on that specific night, he felt particularly anxious. Not because of the importance of the event. After all, he had attended dozens of similar balls, but because of the company he had chosen to bring. Lauren Campbell glided through the ballroom as if she owned the place. At 29, the young woman flaunted a more striking, artificial beauty. With platinum blonde hair falling in perfect waves over bare shoulders, enhanced by the scarlet red Valentino dress Arthur had bought especially for the occasion. The generous neckline and the fabric that hugged every curve of her body did not go unnoticed by the male gazes present, nor by the whispered comments of the society matrons. "Arthur, darling!" The shrill voice of Marguerite Wallace, the wife of a federal senator, cut through the air like a razor. "What a surprise to see you here, and with company." Her eyes scanned Lauren from head to toe, a predatory analysis disguised as social courtesy. "Marguerite, always a pleasure." Arthur forced a smile as he felt sweat form in small beads on his forehead. "This is Lauren Campbell, my special consultant." Lauren laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed through the room. "Consultant? How modest, my love." Her blood-red nails caressed Arthur's arm possessively. "We're much more intimate than that, aren't we?" Arthur's embarrassment was palpable, but Lauren seemed to feed on the situation. She had spent months planning this moment, the night she would finally be introduced to society as Arthur Bennett's new woman. In her youthful and ambitious mind, this was her official coronation. The legitimate wife, Claire, had become a ghostly figure in their conversations, a woman who preferred discretion to the spotlight. And this, for Lauren, was a sign of weakness. "Where is Mrs. Bennett?" Marguerite's question was asked with the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to poke to cause pain. "I haven't seen her at a social event in a long time." Arthur swallowed hard. "Claire has been busy with personal projects." "What a shame," Marguerite murmured, although her tone suggested the exact opposite. She was such an elegant woman. She always knew how to behave with class. The word was hung in the air like a death sentence. Lauren felt a twinge of irritation. Why did everyone keep comparing her to that faded woman? Arthur had told her that Claire was boring, dull, a wife who was content to stay home reading books instead of accompanying him to important events. For Lauren, this only proved that some women were born to shine, while others were born to disappear. "Arthur, "I need to talk to you about the marina project," interrupted Richard Adams, one of the company's minority partners. The relief on Arthur's face was instantaneous. As the men moved away to discuss business, Lauren remained alone in the center of the ballroom, feeling like a queen on her throne. The flashes of social photographers constantly found her, and she knew her photos would be plastered in the gossip magazines the following week. The new passion of Arthur Bennett, or the well-accompanied entrepreneur, she could already imagine the headlines. The sparkling champagne flowed generously among the guests, and Lauren did not hold back. With each sip, she felt more confident, more in control of the situation. She approached a group of socialites she knew superficially from beauty salons and gyms in the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. "Lauren, what a stunning dress," commented Patricia Albright, the wife of a federal judge. "Valentino? A gift from Arthur," Lauren replied, making sure to emphasize the intimacy. "He has such refined taste in choosing women's clothes." The women exchanged knowing glances. They all knew what that meant. Arthur Bennett was publicly flaunting his mistress, a behavior that, while not uncommon in those circles, still caused a stir when done so blatantly. "And how are you adapting to your new position?" Patricia's question had a double meaning, and they all laughed discreetly. "Perfectly," Lauren replied, raising her chin. "In fact, I've always felt more at home in this environment than certain people who isolate themselves at home." The malicious comment about Claire did not go unnoticed. The women present knew well the unwritten code of high society. When a wife stopped appearing at events, it usually meant she had lost the battle to a younger, more ambitious rival. On the other side of the ballroom, Arthur tried to focus on the business conversation, but his eyes constantly wandered to Lauren. Part of him felt proud to be with a woman so young and attractive. It was a confirmation of his virility and success. Another part, however, began to question the wisdom of so openly exposing his extramarital relationship. "She's pretty," commented Richard, following Arthur's gaze. "But don't you think it's risky to bring the friend to an event of this magnitude?" "Lauren is not just a friend," Arthur retorted, more defensively than he intended. "We have a serious relationship." "Serious?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "And does your wife know about this?" Arthur looked away. Claire knew, of course. How could she not? The rumors had been rampant for months, and he didn't even bother to be discreet. But Claire, true to her reserved nature, had not made scenes or threats. She had simply withdrawn even further, which Arthur had interpreted as a tacit acceptance of the new situation. "Claire understands that our marriage has evolved into something different," he murmured, sipping Scotch whiskey. In truth, Arthur had married Claire Reynolds 15 years ago for practical reasons. She came from a traditional family, with important connections in the judiciary and politics, connections that were crucial for the growth of his business. Claire was intelligent, cultured, a perfect wife on paper. But as the years passed, Arthur began to see her as part of the furniture, always present, always reliable, but without the sparkle and excitement he had begun to seek elsewhere. Lauren represented everything his wife was not: spontaneous, sensual, impressionable. When he met her at a law firm party, where she worked as a receptionist, he was immediately attracted to her youth and her thirst for social climbing. It was easy to impress her with expensive dinners and luxurious gifts. It was easy to be the hero in the life of someone who came from a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. "Arthur!" Lauren's voice called him back to the present. She was approaching with a radiant smile, followed by a younger man he recognized as Julian Fitzgerald, heir to one of the country's largest fortunes. "Julian was just telling me about the new art collection he recently acquired," Lauren said, her eyes shining with interest. "Picasso, Van Gogh, it's fascinating." Arthur felt a twinge of irritation. Lauren was clearly flirting, and Julian, known for his reputation as a womanizer, seemed willing to reciprocate. It was humiliating to have to compete for his own mistress's attention in public. "Lauren, we need to talk to the event organizers," he interrupted, taking her arm. "But Arthur, Julian was inviting me to see his private gallery," she protested, pouting. "Another time," Arthur replied dryly, guiding her away from the young heir. As they walked through the ballroom, Lauren murmured in his ear, "You don't need to be jealous, my love. You know you're the only man in my life." The words were supposed to reassure him, but Arthur felt a growing unease. There was something about Lauren's attitude that night. An excessive confidence, a presumption that her place was guaranteed, that deeply bothered him. Next to the main table, where the event organizers and some important politicians were, Arthur spotted Charles Dalton, an influential society journalist. The man was watching them with obvious interest, already mentally drafting the note that would appear in his column the next day. "Arthur Bennett, it's been a while." Charles approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And this lovely young lady must be Mrs. Bennett?" The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur felt his face flush, while Lauren, far from being embarrassed, smiled even wider. "Not yet," she replied with a giggle. "But who knows? Maybe soon." The insinuation was crystal clear. Lauren was not just content to be the mistress. She had bigger plans, and she was announcing these plans to one of the most dangerous gossips in the city. Arthur forced a nervous laugh. "Charles, you know Lauren Campbell?" "Charles, Lauren is one of the most respected journalists in the city." "It's a huge pleasure," Charles said, kissing Lauren's hand with exaggerated gallantry. "I imagine we'll have a lot to talk about in the coming times." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed by Arthur. Charles Dalton had the power to make or break reputations with a single column. If he decided to turn the situation into a scandal, the consequences could be devastating, not only for his public image, but for his business. As they talked, the ballroom continued to fill. Influential politicians greeted businessmen, socialites showed off their latest jewelry and couture acquisitions, and the orchestra played classical waltzes that created a perfect soundtrack for that theater of appearances. Lauren was in her element. She waved to acquaintances, posed for photos, greeted important people as if she were, in fact, Mrs. Bennett. Every gesture was calculated to solidify her position, to make it clear that she was not just a passing fling, but the new reality in Arthur's life. But in the back of her ambitious mind, Lauren couldn't completely ignore the whispers she heard when she passed by. "Where is Claire Reynolds? How embarrassing. Poor Claire was always such a distinguished lady. Why did everyone insist on talking about that woman?" Lauren had never met her personally. Arthur always said that Claire preferred to avoid conflicts and confrontations. For her, this only confirmed her superiority. While Claire hid at home, she was shining in the halls of high society. What Lauren didn't know was that at that very moment, just a few blocks away, Claire Reynolds was meticulously preparing for her own entrance into the Grand Imperial Club. And when she arrived, nothing would be the same again. Do you think a person can be completely betrayed and still manage to win? What would you do in a situation like this? Leave your opinion in the comments below. Claire Reynolds stood in front of the full-length mirror in her closet, observing her own image with the analytical coldness of a general planning a battle. At 35, she possessed a mature and sophisticated beauty that contrasted drastically with the youthful and obvious appeal of her rival. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing a face with classic features that didn't need heavy makeup to make an impact. The dress she had chosen for the night was a masterpiece of French haute couture, an impeccably cut black Chanel with pearl details that ran along the discreet but elegant neckline. The piece had cost more than many cars, but it wasn't the price that made it special. It was what it represented. Power, class, legitimacy, everything that Lauren Campbell was trying to buy with money borrowed from another woman's husband. Claire knew exactly what was happening at the Grand Imperial Club at that moment. She had received no less than 15 calls from concerned friends throughout the week, each one anxious to be the first to tell her about the public humiliation Arthur was inflicting on her. What none of them knew was that Claire had orchestrated every detail of that situation. "Ma'am, the car has arrived," announced Maria, her housekeeper for over a decade, appearing at the closet door. The middle-aged woman watched Claire with admiration and concern in equal measure. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Claire smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in months. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life, Maria." The truth was, Claire had discovered Arthur's betrayal long before any social gossip, not because she was particularly sharp, but because Arthur was embarrassingly careless. Receipts from expensive restaurants for 2 people when he was supposedly at work meetings, charges for jewelry and dresses on his corporate card, a female perfume on his clothes that was definitely not hers. During the first few months, Claire felt the familiar pain of betrayal, the wound to her ego, the feeling of inadequacy, the questioning of where she had failed as a wife. But then, on a particularly melancholic Tuesday afternoon, something changed. She was flipping through a wedding photo album when she came across an image of herself on the day of the ceremony. In that photo, she radiated a light that had been lost over the years of marriage. It was at that moment that Claire understood a liberating truth. She hadn't lost Arthur to Lauren because she had failed as a wife. She had lost Arthur because he had failed as a man. From this epiphany, Claire began to plan. Not a vulgar and emotional revenge, but a cold and surgical strategy that would not only expose the couple's charade, but also guarantee her the freedom she had unconsciously desired for years. For the next 6 months, Claire watched. She discreetly hired a private investigator, not to confirm the betrayal she already knew about, but to meticulously document it. Photographs, videos, hotel records, even recordings of compromising conversations that Arthur and Lauren had in public places, thinking they were safe in the bubble of arrogance they had created. More importantly, Claire used this time to reorganize her finances. Arthur had always assumed she was financially dependent on him, a sexist and ignorant assumption. In reality, Claire had inherited a considerable fortune from her paternal grandmother, investments in real estate and stocks that she managed personally without involving her husband. In addition, she had her own art consulting business that earned much more than Arthur imagined. During the months of her absence from social events, Claire had also dedicated herself to herself in a way she hadn't in years. A personal trainer 3 times a week, regular beauty treatments, a complete wardrobe overhaul. Not to win Arthur back. That bridge had been irreversibly burned. But for herself, on that specific night, Claire had chosen the Hope Foundation ball for precise strategic reasons. It was an event that brought together the core of the NYC elite, people who had known her family for decades and who respected her lineage and class. It was also an environment where the unwritten social rules worked in her favor. As much as they tolerated male excesses in private, the public exposure of a marital betrayal was still seen as an act of bad taste that should be punished. Most crucial of all, Claire knew that Arthur would bring Lauren to the ball. It was she herself who, through a mutual friend, had planted the idea in the ambitious young mistress's head. The Hope Foundation ball is the most important event of the year, she had strategically commented during a lunch. That's where society really shows up. Claire's private driver, John, was waiting for her at the entrance of the building. He was a discreet and loyal man who had worked for the Reynolds family for almost 20 years. He knew all the secrets, all the nuances of Claire's life, and his discretion was absolute. "Good evening, Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted, opening the door of the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "You look stunning tonight." "Thank you, John." To the Grand Imperial Club. During the 30-minute journey, Claire mentally reviewed every detail of her plan. She had timed her arrival for the exact moment the ball was at its peak, when all the important guests were already present, when the social photographers were most active, when Arthur and Lauren were most relaxed and confident. Claire's phone vibrated with a message from Eleanor Moore, the wife of a federal judge and one of her oldest friends. "Darling, they are shamelessly flaunting themselves. She's practically announcing herself as your replacement. Come quickly and end this farce." Claire smiled as she read the message. Eleanor had always been her fiercest ally, an old guard woman who believed wholeheartedly that certain traditions and social hierarchies should be respected. For Eleanor, Lauren was nothing more than a classless social climber, trying to occupy a place that didn't belong to her. Other messages followed, all from indignant friends, reporting Arthur and Lauren's behavior. "She's wearing a red Valentino, completely inappropriate for a charity event," wrote Patricia Albright. He introduced her as a special consultant, but she herself corrected him, saying they were much more intimate, added Marguerite Wallace. Each message confirmed that Claire's plan was working perfectly. Arthur and Lauren were digging their own graves with an almost comical enthusiasm. Claire thought about her life with Arthur during the first years of marriage. She had genuinely tried to be a good wife, support him in his business, accompany him to social events, keep the house impeccable, and be the perfect companion on all occasions. But Arthur had always seemed to see her as an expensive, well-behaved accessory, not a real partner. As the years passed, she realized that Arthur had chosen her not for love, but for social convenience. She brought respectability, family connections, and an image of the ideal wife that complemented his business ambitions. In return, he offered her financial security and social status, a commercial transaction disguised as romance. Claire's awakening to this reality was gradual, but irreversible. She began to notice how Arthur ignored her during conversations at social events, how he interrupted her when she expressed opinions, how he assumed his own decisions were automatically correct without consulting her perspective. Small humiliations that accumulated over the years until they formed an unbearable weight. When she discovered the betrayal, Claire initially felt devastated. But as she observed Arthur's behavior with Lauren, the way he melted at her feigned naivety, how he felt important playing the mentor to the ambitious young woman, she realized she had not lost true love. She had gotten rid of a burden. "We're arriving, Mrs. Reynolds," John announced, interrupting her reflections. Claire looked out the window and saw the golden lights of the Grand Imperial Club shining in the night. Dozens of luxury cars were parked at the entrance, while paparazzi and social photographers awaited the arrival of important personalities. The red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main door, flanked by lush floral arrangements. "John, give me 5 more minutes," Claire requested. "I want my entrance to be memorable." She opened her Hermès bag and checked the contents one last time. In addition to the usual items, lipstick, compact powder, wallet, there was a discreet flash drive containing all the documents and evidence she had collected on Arthur and Lauren. She didn't plan to use it that night, but it was always good to have a trump card up her sleeve. Claire also carried something much more powerful than any physical evidence: the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. For 15 years, she had been the perfect, discreet wife who solved problems without making waves. Tonight, she would be the exact opposite. Her phone vibrated once more. It was a message from Charles Dalton, the social journalist. "Claire, darling, I heard you're coming to the ball. That's great. I missed your elegance at these events. See you inside." Perfect. Charles was clearly setting the stage for an epic confrontation between wife and mistress. Like all good gossip journalists, he could sense the drama in the air and wanted to make sure he had a front row seat when everything exploded. "Now, John, it's showtime." The driver smiled through the rearview mirror. He had seen Claire grow from a shy young woman into a powerful one, and knew that this night would be historic. When the Mercedes stopped in front of the Grand Imperial Club, a murmur spread among the photographers. Claire Reynolds had become a mysterious figure in recent months. Her absence from social events had generated speculation and conspiracy theories. Now, her reappearance promised answers. John got out of the car and calmly walked to the back door. The silence was almost palpable. Even the most experienced paparazzi knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the door opened and Claire placed her foot on the red carpet, there was a moment of suspended time. She was radiant in a way no one remembered seeing before, more confident, more imposing, more genuinely powerful. The flashes went off in a frantic sequence as Claire walked slowly toward the entrance. Each step was calculated. Each movement was a statement. She greeted the photographers with graceful waves, but did not stop for interviews. There was more important work to be done. At the club entrance, the doorman greeted her with an almost feudal bow. "Mrs. Reynolds, what an honor to have you back with us." "The pleasure is mine, Roberto. A beautiful night, isn't it?" As she walked through the club's corridors toward the main ballroom, Claire could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. Music, laughter, lively conversations, the sound of people who had no idea that their lives were about to be turned upside down. She stopped in front of the ballroom's double doors, adjusted her pearl necklace one last time, and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were Arthur and Lauren, probably still basking in the attention they were receiving, still believing they had conquered something important. They had no idea that the true queen had arrived to reclaim her throne. What would you do in a situation like this? Do you believe revenge can be an act of elegance? Let us know your opinion in the comments. The ballroom of the Grand Imperial Club was at its peak when Claire Reynolds made her entrance. The orchestra was playing a Strauss waltz. Couples danced elegantly in the center of the ballroom, and the buzz of conversations created a symphony of well-mannered civility. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light on the impeccable gowns and tuxedos, creating an atmosphere of refined opulence. Arthur was near the bar, laughing loudly at a joke Richard Adams had just told, when the first whisper reached his ears. "Claire has arrived." The smile froze on his face. He turned slowly, searching for the familiar figure of his wife, but he couldn't find her in the crowd. A part of his brain still hoped it was a rumor, that someone had mistaken a brunette in a black dress for Claire. "Arthur," Eleanor Moore's voice sounded behind him like the harbinger of a storm. "Your wife looks stunning tonight." He turned and saw Eleanor with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile that high society women wore when they were about to witness the public humiliation of someone they considered deserving. It was then that he saw her. Claire was entering the main ballroom with the serenity of a queen returning to her palace after a long exile. There was something different about her, an aura of power and self-confidence that Arthur didn't remember ever seeing before. The black Chanel dress hugged her silhouette with mathematical elegance. The pearls on her neck caught the light in a hypnotic way, and her brown hair shone like polished silk. But the most impressive thing was her posture. Claire didn't walk. She glided. Each movement was deliberate, each gesture calculated for maximum impact. And wherever she passed, conversations ceased, gazes turned, and a respectful silence spread like ripples in a pond. Arthur felt his mouth go dry. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Claire command a room like that. It was as if she had transformed from a supporting character into the protagonist of her own life. On the other side of the ballroom, Lauren was telling an anecdote to a group of businessmen's wives when she noticed that her audience had become distracted. They were all staring at something or someone behind her. "What's happening?" she asked, turning to follow the direction of their gazes. And then she saw her too. Lauren had often imagined what her first meeting with Arthur's legitimate wife would be like. In her fantasies, Claire would be a faded woman, visibly aged, clearly inferior in every way that mattered. The reality was a brutal shock. The woman walking towards her radiated a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. There was something almost aristocratic about her posture, an innate class that made Lauren suddenly feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Claire greeted the guests with the perfect grace of someone born into that world. A kiss on the cheek from Marguerite Wallace, a warm handshake with the federal senator, a kind word for the judge's wife. Each interaction reaffirmed her position in the social hierarchy, not as the betrayed wife seeking sympathy, but as the grand lady returning to her rightful place. "Claire, darling!" Patricia Albright's voice cut through the air like a crystal bell. The judge's wife approached with open arms, clearly moved to see her friend after months of absence. "What immense joy to have you back. I missed you so much." The hug between the two women was warm and genuine, in stark contrast to the artificial displays of affection that characterized most interactions in that environment. Lauren watched the scene with growing discomfort, realizing for the first time that Claire was not just Arthur's wife. She was a respected and beloved figure in her own right in that society. "Patricia, you are radiant as always," Claire replied, her melodious voice carrying a tone of genuine affection. "How are you, Roberto? I heard the appointment to the Supreme Court was confirmed." Yes, we're very happy. But tell me about you. Where have you been hiding all these months? You were so missed." Claire smiled with mysterious elegance. "I was taking care of some personal matters. Sometimes a woman needs time to reorganize her priorities." The answer was diplomatically vague, but loaded with subtext that did not go unnoticed by the women present. They all knew about the situation with Arthur and Lauren, and now they were beginning to understand that Claire's absence from social events had not been due to humiliation or despair, but to strategy. While Claire was talking, Arthur remained paralyzed near the bar. Part of him wanted to approach, greet her as if nothing had changed, maintain the facade of a harmonious marriage they had always presented in public. Another part, the cowardly and guilty part, just wanted to disappear. The decision was made by Lauren. The young woman, driven by a toxic mix of jealousy, insecurity, and youthful arrogance, decided that she would not be overshadowed by an older woman, no matter how elegant she was. After all, she was the one with Arthur now. She was the one who wore the expensive gifts, who occupied his bed, who had future plans with him. "Arthur," she whispered, pulling him by the arm. "Let's go greet your wife. It's the polite thing to do." Arthur swallowed hard. "Lauren, maybe this isn't the best time." "Nonsense," she retorted, already walking toward the group around Claire. "We're all civilized adults here." Lauren didn't realize she was about to make the most catastrophic mistake of her young life. In her limited mind, this would be the moment of her official coronation, when she would present herself as Arthur's new woman in front of the previous wife, definitively establishing the new hierarchical order. Claire saw the couples approach long before they got close. Her eyes met Arthur's for a brief moment, and he visibly cringed under her gaze. It was as if she could see right through him, seeing all the guilt, all the embarrassment, all the cowardice he carried. "Claire." Arthur forced a smile as he got close to the group. His voice came out higher-pitched than he intended. What a surprise to see you here." The silence that followed was deafening. All nearby conversations ceased. All eyes turned to the trio, and even the orchestra seemed to lower its volume. It was as if the entire ballroom was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Claire looked at Arthur for a long moment, her expression perfectly serene. When she finally spoke, her voice had the sharp coldness of tempered steel. "Arthur, what an interesting coincidence. I thought you were in Los Angeles this week. An important meeting with investors. Isn't that what you said?" The lie was exposed with surgical elegance. Arthur had invented that excuse to explain his absence from home in recent days, when, in fact, he was at a luxury hotel with Lauren, preparing for the ball. Now, confronted with his own dishonesty in public, he stammered, The meeting was cancelled at the last minute." "What a shame," Claire murmured, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. "Well, at least you didn't miss an event as important as this one." It was then that Lauren decided to intervene. The young woman, misinterpreting the moment and thinking that Claire was being submissive by not directly confronting the situation, took a step forward with a smile that was meant to be sympathetic but sounded condescending. "You must be Claire," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured red nails. "I'm Lauren Campbell. I've heard so much about you." The group around them collectively held their breath. It was a moment of such palpable tension that even the most distant guests began to discreetly approach, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Claire looked at Lauren's outstretched hand for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she greeted her delicately. "Lauren, yes, I've also heard a lot about you." The phrase was uttered with such elegance that it took a few seconds for Lauren to realize the poison contained within it. "Arthur told me you work together," Claire continued, her voice maintaining the perfectly polite tone of high society. "Something about project development consulting?" Arthur opened his mouth to reply, but Lauren interrupted him, clearly eager to establish her true position. "Oh, we're much more than co-workers," she laughed, a high-pitched sound that echoed uncomfortably in the silence of the ballroom. "In fact, Arthur and I have a very special relationship." The words came out of her mouth with the confidence of someone who believed they were revealing a truth that would give them power over the situation. Instead, she had just fallen into the most elegant trap ever built at a New York social event. Claire tilted her head slightly, as if she were processing a particularly interesting piece of information. "Ah, I see," she said, her voice still maintaining that deadly politeness. "How brave, on your part, to make this public in this way." The word brave was pronounced in such a way that it sounded exactly like its antonym. Lauren began to realize that something was wrong, but her youth and inexperience did not allow her to fully decode the nuances of the conversation. Arthur, on the other hand, was pale as paper. He knew Claire well enough to recognize the signs of danger. The overly polite tone, the smile that didn't reach her eyes, the upright and controlled posture. She was furious, but expressing that fury through the refined codes of high society, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any emotional outburst. "Claire," he tried to intervene, "maybe we should—" "Oh, Arthur," she interrupted him softly. "There's no need for embarrassment between civilized people." She turned to Lauren with renewed interest. "Tell me, darling, how long have you two been working together?" Lauren, interpreting the question as an opportunity to establish her supremacy, replied with youthful pride. "About 8 months. Arthur has been a wonderful mentor." "Mentor," Claire repeated, as if savoring the word. "What an interesting term to describe the relationship." The air in the ballroom was so charged with tension that even the waiters had stopped circulating with the champagne trays. Dozens of eyes were fixed on the trio, and Charles Dalton, the social journalist, watched everything from a strategic distance, clearly taking mental notes for his column the next day. Eleanor Moore approached the group with a smile that promised trouble. "Claire, darling," she said, her voice full of feigned innocence. "What a stunning dress! Chanel, isn't it? I've always been envious of your impeccable taste in fashion." "Thank you, Eleanor. You know how it is. Some pieces never go out of style, do they?" The insinuation was clear. True elegance is timeless, Unlike the passing trends displayed by certain younger people, Lauren, finally beginning to realize that she was being subtly attacked, decided to fight back. "Your dress is also beautiful," she said to Claire, her tone attempting to sound generous but failing miserably. "Very classic. It must have been awfully expensive." The comment was a grotesque mistake. To suggest that Claire cared about the price of her clothes, or worse, that she needed to justify her spending, was a demonstration of a lack of class that made several women present gasp in shock. Claire smiled, this time a truly dangerous smile. "My dear," she said, her voice soft as velvet but sharp as a razor, "when you have true class, the price becomes irrelevant. It's something you are either born with or you never acquire." The phrase fell on Lauren like a silent bomb. For a moment, the young woman was speechless, slowly processing the fact that she had been publicly declassed in the most elegant way possible. Arthur tried to intervene again, his voice desperate. "Well, I think we should all—" "Arthur," Claire interrupted him again, this time turning to him with her full attention. "Since we're all here, gathered in such a casual way, maybe it's a good time to clarify a few things." The entire ballroom seemed to have stopped. Even the orchestra had ceased playing, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. "Clarifications are always welcome," murmured Eleanor Moore, barely able to contain her excitement. Claire adjusted the pearls on her neck with deliberately slow movements, like a matador preparing the final thrust. "You see," she said, her voice now carrying a tone of genuine amusement, "there are certain illusions that need to be dispelled before they cause more embarrassment than they already have." Lauren felt a shiver of panic run down her spine. There was something in Claire's attitude, an absolute confidence, an almost predatory serenity, that suggested she knew something important, something that would completely change the game. "I don't understand," Lauren gasped. "Oh, darling," Claire replied, her smile now genuinely radiant. "You will understand. All of you will." And it was then that Claire Reynolds began to methodically, elegantly, and irreversibly destroy the lives of everyone who had underestimated her power. "Arthur," Claire said, her voice cutting through the silence of the ballroom like crystal against crystal. "Since we're among friends, why don't you tell Lauren about our conversation last night?" Arthur's face paled to a color that rivaled the pearls on his wife's neck. His eyes widened in absolute panic, because there had been no conversation with Claire the night before, or on any night in recent weeks. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his trembling voice betrayed his nervousness. Claire tilted her head with feigned curiosity, as if she were genuinely surprised by her husband's answer. "You don't? How strange. Maybe my memory is failing me." She paused theatrically, scanning the circle of spectators that had formed around them. "Or maybe you forgot to mention to your mentor that we are still married." The word mentor was pronounced with such irony that several people in the group had to stifle nervous giggles. Lauren felt the blood rush to her face, finally understanding that she was being publicly ridiculed. "Of course we know you're married," Lauren said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "But marriages evolve, don't they? Sometimes people find happiness in different places." "Ah, yes," Claire agreed with a graceful nod. "Evolution, a fascinating concept." She turned to Eleanor Moore with a conspiratorial air. "Eleanor, you who have been married for 30 years to Roberto, have you experienced this evolution?" Eleanor laughed, a crystalline sound full of aristocratic malice. "Never, darling. Roberto knows his place very well." The comment was a direct thrust at Arthur's masculinity, suggesting that he had failed as a man by not keeping his house in order. Several men present coughed uncomfortably, while their wives exchanged approving glances. Marguerite Wallace joined the group, clearly not wanting to miss the spectacle. "Claire, it's so good to see you at our events again," she said with false effusiveness. Your presence always elevates the level of any occasion. That's very kind, Marguerite. I was just explaining to young Lauren how certain traditions work in our society. Lauren felt increasingly cornered. There was something about the way these women spoke, always polite, always elegant, but carrying a subtle venom that she couldn't counter because she didn't master the necessary social codes. Traditions can be outdated, she said, trying to sound sophisticated. The modern world allows people to be more authentic in their relationships. The silence that followed was so profound that you could hear the tinkling of the chandelier crystals gently swaying with the air-conditioning breeze. Claire watched Lauren for a long moment, like a feline studying its prey before the fatal pounce. Authenticity, she repeated slowly. What a powerful word. You're right, darling. Authenticity is fundamental. She paused, her smile becoming predatory. That's why I think it's time for us to be completely authentic about this situation. Arthur tried to intervene desperately. Claire, maybe this isn't the place. Oh, but it is exactly the right place, she interrupted him, her voice still maintaining that deadly politeness. After all, it was here that you chose to make your partnership public. It's only fair to clarify a few details for our dear friends. Charles Dalton had approached discreetly, his journalist's expression sniffing out the story of the century. Other guests also drew closer, creating an ever-widening circle around the central trio. You see, Claire continued, now, addressing the audience directly, dear Lauren believes she conquered my husband's heart through her youth and authenticity. She paused for dramatic effect. What she doesn't know is that Arthur has a very specific pattern when it comes to his extramarital affairs. Lauren's eyes widened, suddenly realizing she was about to discover something devastating. A pattern? Asked Eleanor, clearly enjoying herself. Oh, yes. Young, ambitious women from humble backgrounds who are easily dazzled by expensive gifts and promises of social climbing. Claire enumerated the characteristics with the precision of a scientist cataloging specimens. In the last 15 years, there have been at least, 6 of them. The number fell on Lauren like a hammer. She wasn't special. She wasn't unique. She was just the most recent in a long line of temporary replacements. Arthur was clearly desperate. Claire, please. Oh, Arthur, don't be modest, she said with false admiration. You have a special talent for finding these girls, always with the same profile. Receptionists, secretaries, hostesses, impressionable young women who confuse male attention with true love. Patricia Albright couldn't hold back a giggle. And what happened to the other 5, darling? Well, Claire replied, as if she were telling a funny anecdote at a tea party. Some were discreetly dismissed when they started making inconvenient demands. Others found out for themselves that they weren't as special as they imagined. 1 or 2 even managed advantageous marriages to more available men. Lauren felt the world spinning around her. Everything she had believed about her relationship with Arthur, its uniqueness, their future plans, her privileged position, was crumbling like a house of cards. But the thing is, Claire continued, now speaking directly to Lauren, you made a mistake that none of the others made. What mistake? The question came out as a strangled whisper. You believed you had won. The words fell on Lauren with the weight of a legal sentence. She looked around, seeing for the first time the expressions of the guests. Not admiration or envy, as she had imagined, but pity mixed with aristocratic contempt. Arthur never told me about the others, she stammered, turning to him in search of denial, explanation, anything that would restore her reality. Arthur couldn't look her in the eye. His guilt was stamped on his face like a tattoo. Of course he didn't tell you, Claire said softly. Why would he? It would ruin the fantasy he creates for each of you. The fantasy that you're special, that you're different, that this time it's true love. Eleanor Moore shook her head with theatrical disapproval. Men can be so cruel, can't they? Making these poor girls believe in fairy tales. The cruelty, Claire said, is not in having extramarital affairs. Powerful men have always had mistresses. It's almost a tradition. The cruelty is in creating false expectations, in making these women believe they can occupy a place that was never intended for them. Lauren finally exploded. And what is that place? The place of the submissive wife who accepts everything in silence? The entire ballroom held its breath. It was the first time anyone had directly confronted Claire, and everyone wanted to see how she would respond. Claire smiled, not the elegant, controlled smile she had maintained all night, but a genuine, almost amused smile. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pity and condescension. "You really don't understand, do you? You think I'm here as the humiliated wife, trying to win back a cheating husband." She paused, her eyes sweeping over all the faces around her. "I didn't come here to fight for Arthur. I came to give him back." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the sound of the waiter's shoes on the marble could be heard. "Give him back?" Lauren repeated, confused. "Yes, darling, you can have him." Claire made an elegant gesture with her hand, as if she were handing over a not-so-desirable gift. "In fact, I insist you keep him. After all, you both deserve each other." Arthur finally found his voice. "Claire, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about freedom, Arthur. Yours and mine." She opened her Hermes bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You should receive the official notification on Monday." The envelope passed from hand to hand, like a grenade with the pin removed. Arthur held it with trembling fingers, his face expressing absolute shock. But we didn't even talk about this." "We did talk about it. For 8 months, Arthur. Every time you came home with another woman's perfume. Every time you lied about where you had been. Every time you treated me like a piece of furniture that decorates the house but doesn't participate in the life that happens inside it." Claire's voice remained serene, but there was tempered steel in every word. The conversation was long and one-sided, but it happened. Lauren looked at Arthur, expecting him to protest, to declare his love for her, to confirm the future plans they had made together. Instead, he looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. "How much do you want?" was the first thing he managed to say. The question revealed so much about his character that several women present made barely disguised expressions of disgust. "Oh, Arthur," Claire said, shaking her head with feigned sadness. "Always reducing everything to money. I don't want your money, darling. I have my own." "Your own?" "Yes. Grandma Beatrice's inheritance, which you always assumed was insignificant because it was just women's things like real estate and stocks, is actually worth more than your company." She smiled. "Much more." The shock on Arthur's face was comical. For 15 years, he had assumed he was the sole provider for the family, the only one with significant resources. To discover that his wife was not only financially independent, but potentially richer than he was a devastating blow to his masculine ego. "Besides," Claire continued casually, "my art consulting business has grown quite a bit in recent years. International clients, you know, people who value authenticity and expertise." Lauren finally understood the full dimension of her humiliation. She had gambled everything on a man she now discovered was not even half the prize she had imagined him to be. "So, you're giving us your blessing?" she stammered, trying to find some thread of dignity to cling to. "Oh, my dear, it's not quite a blessing," Claire replied with deadly gentleness. "It's more like returning a defective product to the store." The phrase echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Several people laughed openly, unable to contain their reaction to the brutal elegance of the response. Arthur finally exploded. "Claire, you can't humiliate me like this in public." "Humiliate you?" She seemed genuinely surprised. "Arthur, darling, I haven't done anything but tell the truth. If the truth is humiliating, Maybe the problem isn't with me. Charles Dalton approached with his social predator smile. Claire, can I have a statement for my column? Of course, Charles. She turned to him with the grace of a seasoned actress. You can say that I'm starting a new chapter in my life. Sometimes, when a door closes, we realize that it was actually holding us captive in a place too small for our dreams. And what about future plans? I'm moving to Paris next week. I have some interesting projects waiting for me there. Paris. The word fell on Arthur like a final sentence. Claire was not just divorcing him. She was literally fleeing the country, putting an ocean between them. Lauren, trying one last desperate move, said, Well, at least now Arthur and I can be happy together without secrets or lies. Claire looked at her with a mixture of pity and amusement. Oh, my sweet, naive girl, she said, her voice full of an almost maternal condescension. Do you really think that a man who cheated on his wife with you won't cheat on you with another? The truth of the statement hit Lauren like a punch to the stomach. She looked at Arthur, searching for some sign of denial, some guarantee of future fidelity. Instead, she saw a man in total panic, more concerned with the financial implications of the divorce than with the feelings of either of the two women present. Arthur, she whispered, a clear plea in her voice. He didn't answer. He couldn't answer, because deep down, he knew Claire was right. And it was in that moment of absolute silence that Claire Reynolds delivered the final blow. Well, Claire said, adjusting the pearls on her neck with an elegant and definitive movement. It was a pleasure to clarify all of this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to say goodbye to some dear friends before my trip. She turned to leave, but stopped as if she had remembered something important. Oh, and Lauren? The young woman looked up hopefully, perhaps believing that Claire would offer her some word of reconciliation or advice. The red dress looks beautiful on you, but for charity events, more sober colors are more appropriate. It's a matter of social etiquette. The final criticism was delivered with such elegance that even the most experienced observers needed a few seconds to fully process the brutality of the comment. Claire had just given a lesson in etiquette in the middle of a public humiliation, definitively establishing the social hierarchy between them. Lauren stood still, paralyzed by shame, while Claire walked away gracefully. Arthur remained beside her, but it was obvious to everyone that he was in a state of shock, still processing the speed with which his life had fallen apart. Charles Dalton watched the scene with the sharp gaze of someone who had just witnessed the social story of the year. He was already mentally drafting the headline, "The Elegant Revenge: How Claire Reynolds Turned Humiliation into Triumph at the Most Talked About Ball of the Season." As Claire circulated through the ballroom, saying goodbye to guests, each conversation reaffirmed her position as the true winner of the night. Eleanor Moore hugged her warmly. "Darling, you were masterful. I've never seen anyone maintain so much class in such a delicate situation." "Thank you, Eleanor. Sometimes elegance is the best revenge." Patricia Albright joined the group. "Paris, how romantic. Do you have specific plans there?" "As a matter of fact, I do." Claire's eyes sparkled with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been invited to be an art consultant for a very prestigious gallery in the 16th arrondissement. And there are other interesting possibilities as well." The mysterious smile on her face suggested that there was much more to the story, but Claire was not inclined to give out details. She would let others' imaginations fill in the blanks. On the other side of the ballroom, Lauren finally began to move, like a sleepwalker waking from a nightmare. She looked around and realized that she had become the center of a very different kind of attention. Not admiration, but pity mixed with malice. Whispers followed her movements. Poor thing, she didn't know what she was getting into. She thought she was going to get into high society through the back door. Arthur always had questionable taste in mistresses. Each comment was like a stab at her pride. Lauren had arrived at the ball, believing she would be crowned the new queen. Instead, she was publicly unmasked as a naive and inadequate pretender. Arthur tried to approach her. "Lauren, let's talk privately." "No." She recoiled as if he were contagious. "Don't touch me. You lied to me about everything." Tears began to stream down Lauren's perfect makeup, creating dark trails on her cheeks. The realization that she had been just one more in a long line of disposable women was devastating for someone who had always considered herself special. "Lauren, please, let me explain." Arthur tried again, but his voice sounded desperate and unconvincing. "Explain what? That I'm the disposable one? That I was never special? That you never intended to marry me?" Her voice grew louder and louder, attracting even more glances. "I quit my job, moved out of my apartment, told my family I was going to marry an important businessman." The public confession of her naivety only deepened her humiliation. Some guests shook their heads in pity, while others exchanged "I told you so" looks, typical of high society when their predictions are confirmed. Julian Fitzgerald, the young heir who had flirted with her earlier, approached with a condescending smile. "Lauren, don't be so desperate. Arthur was always known for his temporary affairs. You shouldn't have gotten so attached." The remark, while meant to be comforting, only confirmed that all of society knew about Arthur's reputation, except her. Lauren realized she had been the last to know about her own relationship. Meanwhile, Claire continued her triumphant farewell tour. Each conversation revealed more details about her future plans, painting the picture of a woman who had not only escaped an unhappy marriage, but had meticulously planned her ascent to a better life. "The Dubois Gallery is one of the most respected in Paris," she told a group of art enthusiasts. "They were impressed with my work on the Monet Newman exhibition last year." What she didn't mention, but what they would discover later through international gossip channels, was that Pierre Dubois, the gallery owner, was an aristocratic widower in his late 40s, who had been charmed not only by Claire's professional expertise, but also by her personal elegance. Marguerite Wallace pulled Claire into a more private corner. "Darling, can I ask an indiscreet question? This move to Paris, is there someone waiting for you there?" Claire smiled with calculated mystery. "Let's just say there are interesting possibilities. A man who values intelligence as much as beauty, who understands that a woman can be a partner, not just an ornament. French? With the elegance that only the French possess. And," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "with resources that make Arthur's business look like a corner bazaar." Marguerite was delighted. "Darling, you are simply inspirational. To turn betrayal into liberation, humiliation into triumph, is a work of art." On the other side of the ballroom, Arthur finally managed to calm Lauren enough for a more private conversation. They moved away to one of the club's smaller rooms, away from curious glances. "Lauren, I know you must be confused, but we can get through this." "Get through this?" She stared at him with disbelief. "Arthur, you made a fool of me for 8 months, made me believe I was special, that I had a future with you. And you do. Now that Claire is asking for a divorce, we can finally be together officially. With what money?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You heard what she said. She's richer than you. In the divorce, you could lose half of everything you have." The financial reality hit Arthur like a slap. For years, he had assumed he controlled all the couple's finances. To discover that Claire not only had her own resources, but that they were superior to his, was a devastating shock. "That can't be true," he murmured. "The stocks, the real estate, they're just family inheritances. Inheritances that are worth more than your company." Lauren was beginning to see Arthur for who he really was. Not the successful, powerful businessman she had imagined, but a middle-aged man who had just discovered his wife was his most valuable asset. And he had lost her. At that moment, Charles Dalton appeared at the door of the room. "Arthur, Can I have a word for my column tomorrow? There's nothing to comment on, Arthur replied dryly. Oh, but there is. The most elegant wife in New York society announcing her move to Paris. One of the most civilized divorces I've ever witnessed. It's a fascinating story. Charles wasn't really asking for permission. He was informing them that the story would be published with or without Arthur's cooperation. And you, Lauren? Charles turned to her with journalistic interest. Any comment on the evening's events? Lauren looked at Arthur, expecting him to defend her, to publicly declare their future plans together. Instead, he seemed to shrink even more, clearly unwilling to commit publicly to her after the night's disaster. The lack of support was the last straw. Lauren realized she had lost not only the battle against Claire, but also any chance of a future with Arthur. He was too cowardly to defend her when she needed it, too weak to take responsibility for his own actions. My only comment, she said, straightening her shoulders with a newfound dignity, is that some life lessons are too expensive to be worth it. With those words, Lauren left the room, leaving Arthur alone with Charles Dalton and the weight of his own choices. 3 years later, Paris. The apartment in the 16th arrondissement had a view of the Eiffel Tower and was decorated with a perfect combination of French elegance and Brazilian sophistication. Claire Reynolds, now Claire Dubois, was sitting on the terrace, drinking coffee while watching her 2-year-old twins, Henry and Beatrice, play in the private garden. Pierre Dubois entered the terrace carrying a tray with fresh croissants and the morning newspaper. Mon amour, he said, gently kissing Claire's forehead. There's an interesting article here about the United States. Claire smiled, accepting the cup of coffee he offered her. At 38, she radiated a happiness she had never experienced during her 15 years of marriage to Arthur. Pierre was not just a better husband. He was a true partner, someone who respected her intelligence and ambition as much as he admired her beauty. What kind of article? About corporate bankruptcies. It seems a real estate developer called Bennett Ventures closed its doors last month. Arthur? Apparently. The article mentions poor financial management and lawsuits. The owner, Arthur Bennett, is being investigated for tax irregularities. Claire felt no pleasure at the news. That phase of her life was completely over. But there was a certain poetic justice in the fact that Arthur, who had always considered himself financially superior to her, had lost everything due to his own incompetence. And the young woman he was with that night at the Grand Imperial Club? Asked Pierre, who knew the whole story. Lauren. Claire thought for a moment. I heard she married a dentist in Connecticut. Apparently she learned her lesson about not betting on losing horses. Pierre laughed, a rich, warm sound that echoed across the terrace. You're terrible, my darling, but it's poetic justice, as we say. Henry ran to the table, speaking an adorable mix of English and French. Mommy, look! I picked a flower for you! Claire picked up her son, accepting the small daisy he had picked in the garden. Beatrice soon joined them, demanding equal attention. Mes petits trésors, Pierre murmured, watching the scene with obvious adoration. This was the life Claire had built for herself, not as revenge against Arthur, but as a reward for her own courage. She had transformed betrayal into liberation, humiliation into opportunity, and an ending into a new beginning. The Dubois Gallery had become one of the most prestigious in Paris under her curatorship, and she was expecting her third child, a girl they would name Sophia, in honor of the grandmother who had left her the inheritance that made her independence possible. As she watched her children play in the Parisian garden, Claire reflected on the night at the Grand Imperial Club 3 years ago. She had planned every detail of that public humiliation, but now she realized that the true victory had not been destroying Arthur and Lauren that night. The true victory was this: a life built on her own terms, with a man who loved her completely, children who filled her heart, and a career that fulfilled her soul. In the end, Claire Reynolds had discovered that the best revenge is not the destruction of your enemies, but the construction of a life so spectacular that it makes everything they did to try to diminish you irrelevant. The shattered vows Elara believed in love. She gave up everything for him, and she was cast out onto the street, pregnant, in the rain. Alone? That night, she was hit by a car. But no one imagined that. That was where her turning point would begin. With a baby in her womb and a strength the world had underestimated, Elara shivered without knowing why. She stood in front of the mirror, her hand slowly tracing the curve of her 7-month belly. The stretched skin, the larger breasts, the dark circles under her eyes. Everything about her screamed exhaustion. Yet something inside her insisted on reminding her that this was all for love, that all of this had a purpose. Outside, the muffled sound of music rose through the walls. A party. Another one. Julian said they were important for business, for maintaining their image. She only went to keep him company, and out of fear of being left alone. The house was full, but Elara felt like a disembodied presence floating through a crowded room. She passed through the people as if she were invisible. They smiled, toasted, and made jokes. No one noticed how much she was unraveling inside. 3 years earlier, Julian had promised her she would never cry, that he would make her happy every day, that he would take care of her like no one else had. "With me you will never cry. I'll give you the world." That's what he said, and she believed him. She was young, a dreamer with a soul full of space to get lost in, and she truly got lost. She dropped out of university in her 3rd semester. She argued with her parents. She left home. She took a bus toward a future that only existed in his eyes. At first, Julian was sweet. He brought her coffee in bed, left little notes, and laughed at the silly movies she loved. He worked a lot, but always came back with something in his hand. Flowers, gifts, promises. He had magnetic eyes and a firm voice. When he spoke, she believed, because he made it feel true. But the gestures became strange. The words, shorter. The touch, more distant. The silences began. Long. Uncomfortable. She would ask if everything was okay, and he would reply, "Everything's perfect," without looking up from his phone. Sometimes, he didn't even respond. He'd walk past her as if she were part of the furniture. When she complained, he would turn the situation around. "You're too sensitive. It's hormonal. Just don't get so emotional." Then came the criticisms. Harsh, but disguised as jokes. "You can't talk without getting emotional. Try not to gain so much weight, love. It's for your own good. You just complain. You're starting to sound like your mother." Elara began to doubt herself. Maybe she was being annoying, exaggerating. Maybe it was the hormones, like he said. She was pregnant after all. Sensitive. Needy. When she tried to talk about how she felt, Julian would shut down. "We'll talk later. Not now. Don't be a pain." And she would fall silent. She would swallow it all down. She was afraid to push too hard and ruin the little that was left. She wanted to keep the peace in the house. The baby needed that. She needed that. The party that night was different. Louder. More crowded. People she didn't even know flowed through the living room with wine glasses, laughing loudly. Elara tried to look fine. She wore a long black dress, fitted to her belly, pulled her hair back, and put on lipstick. She was insecure, but she made the effort. Julian didn't even notice her. When she appeared on the staircase, he was with Isabella, the new secretary, young, elegant, with that kind of calculated confidence. Isabella looked at Elara and smiled, like someone sizing up a threat, and she saw none. Elara tried to approach. She said, "Hello." Julian replied with a nod and turned back to his conversation. The night continued like a slow-motion nightmare. Elara felt she didn't belong there. She wasn't part of anything anymore. She tried to talk to one or two people, but was soon forgotten between monotonous replies. She sat on the sofa, exhausted. Her back hurt. Her legs, too. No one asked how she was. In the middle of the room, Julian spoke loudly. He joked. He drank. He charmed everyone with his magnetic presence. He was good at that. He knew how to be the center. And then it happened. Out of nowhere, he looked at Elara. He pointed to her with a glass in his hand, and he laughed. "Look at how pregnancy destroys a woman." The room erupted in a restrained laughter. Isabella put a hand to her mouth, as if she were shocked, but her eyes gleamed with malice. Elara froze. She stood up slowly, her heart pounding, her cheeks on fire. "Julian, please." It was all she could manage to say, a plea so soft it was almost inaudible. He turned to her, his eyes narrowed, and a twisted smile of a man who knows he is winning. "You're a nobody now." Elara felt as if the floor had disappeared. Julian put his glass on the table and walked toward her. The entire room watched. He stopped inches from her face. The smell of alcohol. "Get out of my house!" She didn't respond. She just stood still. An instinct for self-preservation blocking any reaction. He grabbed her arm hard, and he pulled her. Fast. Without warning. The door swung open. The rain outside was fine and freezing. Elara tried to resist, but she was weak. Pregnant. Dazed. Julian shoved her out the door, still holding her wrist. Her heel slipped on the wet entryway. She almost fell. "Disappear from my sight, Elara." And the door closed. Locked. Silently. She was left there. In the darkness, with the wind chilling her dress, her hair plastered to her face, her hands on her belly, trying to protect what little she had left. No one came after her. No light turned on. No apology was whispered. It was as if she had never existed. The street was empty. The sound of the party was muffled behind the door. Her silence, deafening. The rain intensified. Her shoes were soaked. Her legs were trembling. She walked slowly to the curb and sat down. The cold of the pavement seeped through her dress and cut her skin like a knife. Her hands trembled. Her heart beat erratically. But what hurt the most was the silence. She sat there for minutes, hours. She didn't know. She had lost track of time. She only felt the weight of her belly, the weight of the rejection, the weight of having nowhere to go. Her face was wet with rain, and with the tears she didn't even notice were falling. It no longer made a difference. Then, she placed both hands on her belly. She pressed gently and whispered, "I will protect you, even if no one protects me." Her voice broke at the end, but the promise was made. Through clenched teeth, through sobs, through the pieces. And it was in that exact moment that she realized something inside her still breathed. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't the promise of a perfect life. It was no longer love. It was her, and the life that was growing inside her. The world outside might not see. It might not understand. It might even laugh. But in that instant, alone, wet, broken, Elara discovered a kind of strength she didn't know she had. And that strength was all she had left. A new life rises. Elara didn't remember the impact. Not the car, not the sound, not the pain. Only the cold on her face. The rain mixed with blood, and the sensation of falling, even though she was already lying on the asphalt. Screams, running footsteps, a panicked male voice trying to wake her, and the strong smell of burnt rubber. "Ma'am?" The voice trembled. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened for a second. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. A sharp pain pierced her belly, as if something inside her was moving desperately. And then, everything went white. When she came to, she was being pushed down an overly bright hallway, with lights cutting into her eyes. A nurse was talking to someone, but the voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. There were sounds, movements, but nothing made sense. She tried to lift her arm, but she was immobilized. She felt a weight on her chest, and a fear that bordered on panic. "Easy, Alara. You need to breathe." The female voice sounded firm. A cold touch held her hand. She tried to ask about the baby, but only a raspy sound came from her mouth. "We're doing everything we can, but we have to act now. Do you understand? You're in labor." She barely processed the phrase. Labor? Here? At the hospital? After being thrown out into the street? After everything? Her body trembled uncontrollably, and she no longer knew if it was from fear, pain, or exhaustion. Maybe all of it together. Maybe just pure desperation. When she tried to react, her entire body responded with a brutal, dry contraction, as if something was tearing inside. The nurse yelled for another gurney, and everything became a blur of hands, orders, and internal alarms. "Abdominal trauma. Could the baby be in distress? Bring the portable ultrasound. Blood pressure is dropping. Quick, over here." Alara closed her eyes. She didn't want to die. Not now. Not with her son inside her. Not like this. The delivery room looked like a battlefield. Masks, scalpels, bright lights. Someone held her arms carefully. Another person held her leg. The doctor introduced herself, but her voice was lost in the middle of the pain. And then, for an instant, everything went silent. Not outside. Inside. As if time had stopped, and all that was left was the memory of the night before, the rain, the shove, Julian's phrase echoing endlessly. "You're a nobody now." That phrase seemed to have taken root in her like poison. But no, it wasn't true. It couldn't be, because inside her, something was still fighting. Something still existed. A life. And she needed to bring it into the world. Instinct spoke louder. Between contractions and screams, Alara clung to the only thing she had left. Her promise. She screamed. A torn, desperate animal cry. And she pushed. She pushed with all the accumulated pain of the last months. With the abandonment, the loneliness, the humiliation. She pushed with her eyes closed and her teeth clenched. And then came the sound. A cry. Small, but strong. Alive. Human. For a second, she didn't understand. Then, everything inside her gave way. "It's a boy. He's breathing. Stable pulse. He's okay." The nurse placed him in her arms. A wrinkled baby crying loudly, with closed fists and still red skin. And there, in the middle of the chaos, Alara also cried. But not from fear, not from pain. It was a new kind of cry. A cry of relief. Of 1,000 things mixed together. Of life. She caressed his cheek with her finger and whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "You saved me, before you were even born." He stopped crying for a moment, and he opened his eyes. 2 dark, living points, as if he recognized her. The nurse smiled, but didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The scene said it all. Hours later, now in a quieter room, Alara was sitting, her body still sore, but with her son nestled against her chest. A doctor came in, writing something on a chart. "Father's name?" she asked, without looking up. Alara didn't hesitate. "He died." The doctor finally looked at her, and for a second, their eyes met. But there were no more questions, because sometimes a man dies long before he stops breathing. After she left, Ilara was alone again. But now, with a sleeping baby in her arms. And that silence, which used to crush her, now seemed different, almost light. She looked at his little face, his small hands, his fine eyelids, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something akin to peace. But there was also fear, a real, deep fear, because she had nowhere to go, no money, no support. She didn't know what would come next. She only knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. And that changed everything. As the early morning passed slowly and the hospital corridors grew silent, Ilara stayed there, awake, thinking, remembering every word said, every gesture received, everything she would have to forget or transform. Because now she couldn't afford to fall. Now she was someone's ground, and she couldn't give way. When the baby moved, she cradled him carefully, as if that gesture were her new mission in the world. He sighed, as if to say everything was all right, and even if she didn't know what would come next, she believed him. Even if it was just for that night. A mother's foundation. The impact left marks, but it also revealed something no one saw. Ilara was still alive, and what came next, she would decide. One step at a time, one breath at a time. With a baby on her chest, and a heart that, despite everything, still beat, firm and ready. The hospital room was silent when a nurse came in to check her vital signs. Ilara pretended to be asleep. She no longer had the strength to speak. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. But inside, everything was in motion. A silent whirlpool of fear, confusion, and irresponsibility. The baby slept on her chest, warm from their skin-to-skin contact. She didn't understand how something so small could carry so much weight. So much peace, so much reason to go on. Hours later, she was discharged. No family member came to pick her up. No address to return to. She took the few clothes she was wearing, put the hospital papers in a plastic bag, and she left, with the baby in her arms, with nowhere to go. The city seemed bigger now, colder, more distant. She walked. She walked until her legs ached, until the weight of her body and her son broke her back, until her knees almost gave way. When she stopped in front of the Community Assistance Center, she hesitated. The sign was old, the walls dirty, but there was a light inside, and within the light, perhaps an opportunity. The man at the reception barely looked at her. He filled out a form in a hurry. He asked short questions. Name, age, how many children, at-risk situation. She only answered with her head. They sent her to an emergency shelter. A temporary place, they said. Just for a few days. A room with 2 other mothers. Bunk beds, thin mattresses, a damp smell. But there was a roof, hot water, a borrowed bottle. The first night, Ilara cried in silence, her back to the wall. The other mothers were sleeping. One was snoring. The other was mumbling in her dreams. The baby cried too, a high-pitched, insecure cry. She cradled him, even though her arms ached. She sang something improvised, voicelessly, and he fell back asleep. The next morning, she received a package of used diapers, a change of donated clothes, a cold coffee. All of it hard, all of it foreign, but enough to continue. The following days dragged on. Noises, lines, voices, hurried social workers, children running in the hallways, mothers yelling from exhaustion. Ilara felt invisible. But every time she looked at her son, something inside her held her up, even if it was just barely. The third day dawned gray. The rain had returned. soft but constant. In the dining hall, someone dropped a tray. A child screamed. Another fell. A woman was crying in a corner. Elara stepped away. She sat in the hallway with the baby in her arms, her forehead resting against the cold wall. She took a deep breath. She smelled his diaper, the warmth of his little body against her chest, the feeling of dissolving inside. Then she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She took out her phone. It was off. The battery had died 2 days earlier. One of the shelter workers lent her a charger. Elara waited for it to get to 5%. She was trembling. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew who she was going to call. The contact list was empty. Almost all the old numbers had been erased, but her mother's number was still there. Almost automatic, as if the phone knew that when everything is over, that's where you return. She called once, twice, 3 times, 4. The call was disconnected. She was about to give up, but she called again. This time, someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was low, tired, familiar. Elara swallowed. "Mom," silence. From the other side, the sound of a sigh. An empty space between one sentence and another that said everything. "Come home," just that. No questions, no reproaches, no judgment. And that simple answer was like a crack, a fissure that broke everything she had been holding in. She hung up before her mother could say anything else. Then she cried. But not like before, not from desperation. She cried from relief, from shame, from a forgotten love that was still there, waiting for her. She looked at the baby. He was awake, moving his hands in the air, as if he was trying to touch the world. She caressed his face with her fingers, and in that instant, without the strength to promise anything, she just thought, "I will never again let anyone extinguish who I am." Because she knew it. She knew she had let herself shrink, disappear, fade away little by little. But now, someone depended on her light, on her warmth, on her presence, on her love, and that would be bigger than any fear, a new identity. In the afternoon, she spoke with the social worker. "I have somewhere to go now." The woman seemed relieved, one less person to worry about. She made some calls, arranged the departure. Elara took a bag with donated clothes, wrapped herself in a blanket, and protected the baby from the wind. She got on a bus with her last few coins. She sat by the window. She held her son like someone carrying the most valuable thing in the world. The trip lasted almost 2 hours. The road seemed longer than she remembered, but her eyes were firm, her body wounded. The tiredness was still there, the pain too, but something else was being born inside. It wasn't just motherhood. It was a kind of courage that appears when there is no other option. When the bus stopped, she got off carefully. The street was the same as before. The iron gate, the window with the plants, the smell of the neighbors cooking. Elara took a deep breath. She rang the doorbell. The door opened. Her mother was there, older than she remembered, smaller, but with the same eyes. Eyes that recognized her immediately, without needing explanations. They didn't say anything to each other. Her mother opened her arms. Elara stepped inside, and in that small space, smelling of the past, she knew it was the right place. Her grandmother took the baby with trembling hands. The baby looked at her. Then he looked at Elara. And for the first time since everything fell apart, the house was filled with warmth. Dinner was simple. Rice, beans, a fried egg. But Elara ate like someone who hadn't tasted food in days. Because it was true. Afterward, she took a long bath. She washed her hair. She looked at her body in the mirror. Still wounded. Still fragile. but whole. She put on an old cotton nightgown, the same one she used as a teenager. She lay down with her son in her arms. Her mother turned off the light, and in the darkness, the baby moved his hand, as if looking for her breast. She gave it to him. He nursed, and in that moment, without speaking, without promising, without planning, she knew it. Nothing would ever stop her again. Now, it was her for herself, and for him. Always. Her mother's house was small, simple, without luxuries. But it had something Alara hadn't felt in a long time. Security. For the first time since everything fell apart, she slept without fear of being thrown out, without having to measure her words, without shrinking. The days began to organize themselves into a routine. She woke up early, took care of the baby, helped her mother with meals, and in her free time, she studied alone. She reread old notes, borrowed books from the public library, and took handwritten notes in old notebooks. The city where she grew up seemed different now. She was also different. The places from her childhood, the streets where she walked when she was just a girl full of plans, now seemed like distant fragments of a life left behind. Still, she didn't want to go back to who she was. She wanted to be more. She wanted to be someone else. She wanted to rebuild herself. It wasn't easy, nothing was. Alara needed money. She knew that depending on her mother was temporary, and that her son needed more than a roof and rice with an egg. He needed a foundation, a strong woman as a reference. She started by selling cakes. She used her grandmother's recipe, adapted it, tested it in her mother's kitchen, and put them in plastic jars with a simple handmade label, Sweet Light. She went out into the street with her backpack full and her son in his stroller. She knocked on the doors of hair salons, stationery stores, schools. Some people bought out of pity, others out of courtesy, but some came back for more. At the end of the month, she paid a portion of the household bills. For the first time, she put money on the table and felt proud. She worked at events. She cleaned school bathrooms. She took care of an old lady some nights. Everything that came up, she did. At night, when the baby was asleep, she studied. And on weekends, she took her son in her arms, sat in the town's central square, and watched people pass by. Almost no one recognized her, and those who did pretended not to see her. She didn't care. There was something bigger now, herself. She started using her full name again. Alara Herrera, a last name she had left behind when she believed that a man's love was worth more than her own identity. Now, it was the other way around. She signed that name with strength, with truth, a new legacy. One day, in a circle of mothers at the health center, she heard one of them talking about being threatened by her ex. The woman was trembling as she spoke. Alara didn't know what to say, but she offered to help. She wrote down her name. She looked up information on the internet about women's rights. She wrote a note explaining how to file for a restraining order. The next day, she returned to the center just to give it to her. The woman cried. Other mothers began to seek her out. Some wanted guidance. Others just wanted to be heard. Alara wasn't a social worker or a lawyer, but she was something few people were. Someone who had gone through all of that herself. She decided to transform that into something bigger. She created a WhatsApp group, Women in Motion. At first there were 5, then 10, then 20. She got a borrowed room at the neighborhood church. She held bi-weekly meetings. She invited volunteer psychologists. She recorded videos with her old phone and uploaded them to social media. One of them went viral. The video had a simple caption, "Women who fell," but chose to get up. Her voice was firm, but emotion cracked her words. "I'm not strong because I want to be. I'm strong because I had no choice. But today, I choose to transform the pain into a path. Thousands of people saw it, commented, shared. She received messages from everywhere. People thanking her, people asking for help, people offering support. A local report came out, then a note in a national publication. Suddenly, Elara Herrera was a reference. An NGO contacted her to offer a partnership. In a short time, she officially founded her own project. Reborn, a support network for women at risk. She got a space, donations, volunteers, and more than all that, respect. Her son grew up watching everything up close. He was the one who helped hand out flyers. He slept on her lap during meetings. He sat in a corner while she gave talks. He drew with markers on the charts. He knew the names of the women. He called all of them Aunt. Elara took care of her son, like she took care of the world, with patience, with strength, with truth. Sometimes she would cry in secret. She still felt fear. She still had doubts. But she kept going, because she didn't allow herself to stop. She was invited to speak at events, to give interviews, to coordinate projects with municipalities. Everything happened faster than she imagined, but never outside of what she believed. From a shelter to the top, but without forgetting where she came from. One of the most memorable nights was when she received a Women's Leadership Award. She was on stage, her son sitting in the front row. He wore a small, improvised suit and held a paper flower that he had made himself. As she gave her speech, Elara swallowed her emotions. The auditorium was silent. She spoke calmly. When I was thrown out into the street, pregnant, I thought everything was over, that my story would only be about pain. But then, he was born, and it was as if someone had turned on the light again. My son didn't just save me. He showed me who I am. She looked at the boy, and I promised him that I would do everything necessary for him to grow up seeing a woman standing, strong, present, not afraid to exist. Applause, people crying, cameras filming, but she only saw her son smiling, proud. Elara got off the stage and he ran to her. He hugged her legs and told her in her ear, "Mom is a giant." She laughed. She knelt down, lifted him into her arms, and she whispered, "And you are my reason." It was for him, always, the man who was nothing. Julian looked at his phone for the 100th time that morning. No response. No notification. No opportunity. The room, once impeccable, was now taken over by crumpled papers, empty glasses, and the remnants of days badly lived. The sofa where Isabella used to lounge had a wine stain. The whole place looked abandoned from the inside, exactly like him. He leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on a random spot. It was over. The company, the woman, the illusion of control. Everything. At the last meeting with investors, he tried to convince them that it was just a bad streak, that the market was unstable, that they would soon grow again. But no one believed him anymore, not even himself. His luxury car had been repossessed. The employees began to sue him. The press exposed him. And Isabella? Isabella took everything she could, even the shared account that, out of naivete or vanity, he had left in her name. When he found out, he tried to call her. He sent her messages. She read them and blocked him. In their last conversation, before she disappeared, she was direct. "You lost the only thing that was worth it when you threw that woman out of your house. The rest was just pure decoration." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The few friends he had left disappeared when the parties ended. when the dinners with expensive wine turned into solitary dinners with cold pizza and a silent television. But the worst part wasn't the ruin or the betrayal. It was the emptiness. The image of Alara haunted him, at first with contempt, as if she had been a burden he had to endure. Then, as a memory of something he had lost, and that would never return. He started drinking in the afternoons, then in the mornings, then at any time. He wanted to convince himself that it was just to relax, but deep down, he just wanted to stop feeling. One morning, in the middle of a hangover, he woke up on the kitchen floor. He had vomited near the sink. He was cold and hungry, and he had a kind of longing that no words could hold. He got up, swaying, took out his phone, and opened Alara's profile. He didn't have the courage to follow her. He just watched. The photos showed a firm woman with a serene gaze. There was a strength in her he hadn't known before, and the boy was identical to her. But in his eyes, there was something of him too. A shadow of the past that somehow was still alive there. He started thinking about his son. He had never seen him. He had never held him in his arms. He had never heard his voice. He only knew he existed. And that now was what hurt the most. He sent flowers, an expensive bouquet with a handwritten card. "Forgive me for everything. I want to meet my son." Silence. He tried to write a letter. He wrote and ripped it up. Then another, and another. On the 5th attempt, he carefully folded it and sent it by mail. He waited for days. Nothing. Finally, he decided to write directly. An email. Cold. Desperate. "I don't want to come back. I just want to meet him. See his face. I know I was wrong, and I know I don't deserve it. But he has a right to know who I am." The response arrived the next day. Short, sharp, clear. "You lost the only woman who made you look like a man, and that boy already has the hero he needs. I am." He reread the message 5 times. Then he closed the computer and stayed silent. He didn't shed a single tear. There was nothing left to cry about. He spent the rest of the day sitting in the darkness, thinking, remembering. From the day he met her, from how she looked at him, with that childlike sparkle of someone who believes that love saves. From how she held his hand, without asking for anything in return. From how he mocked her purity. From how he broke something he could never put back together. Deep down, he knew he was never a man for her. He was only the reflection of what she wanted to see, and when she finally saw who he was, it was too late. Now Alara was a respected woman, a symbol, and he was just another man who destroyed everything he touched. He left the apartment for the first time in days. His face was tired, his beard neglected. He walked the streets trying to understand where he had gotten lost. The answer was obvious, but he still didn't know how to face it. He stopped in front of the NGO's headquarters. He saw a poster from a distance with Alara's face smiling, alongside other women. There was something in that smile that seemed unattainable, an irreversible distance. He didn't have the courage to go in, or to wait. He just stood there, as if that place was a grave where he had buried the only good version of himself. He went away. That night he dreamed of his son. He couldn't see him clearly. It was just a boy running, laughing, playing. He tried to reach him, but the boy always turned the corner before he could, always escaped. He woke up soaked in sweat, his heart racing, and with an unbearable certainty, he was not part of his son's life, and he wouldn't be. He took the last bottle of whiskey from the shelf and emptied it into the sink. The bottle shattered at the bottom, and the smell spread. It was the first time he had done it, without an audience, without promises, just him and the shame. The next day, he called a rehabilitation center. He asked for help. He gave his name, and he waited. The voice on the other end said there was a place. He took a deep breath. He knew he wasn't starting from scratch. He was starting from -1,000. But he had to do something other than just lament. He got in the car. He drove in silence. No music, no distractions. For the first time, perhaps he was willing to feel everything he had avoided for years. Because, in the end, his fall wasn't when he lost the money, or when Isabella betrayed him, or when his friends disappeared. The real fall was the moment he lost the woman who saw a better man in him. And now, all that was left was the sound of his own conscience. Heavy, but necessary. The unspoken waltz. The hall was lit with soft, golden lights that fell from the ceiling as if the night had been carefully designed to happen there. The round tables were dressed in white and wine. The china was perfectly aligned. The glasses were gleaming, and the smiles were rehearsed. There were journalists at the entrance, politicians disguised as philanthropists, businessmen interested in alliances, and photographers attentive to every gesture of the night's hostess. Ilara walked into the center of the hall with her son at her side. He wore a navy blue suit, fitted to his small body. But in his eyes, he carried a maturity that didn't match his age. He was a reflection of the woman who had raised him. Firm steps, a direct gaze. They walked as if they belonged not just to that event, but to the world they were building outside of it. She greeted the guests with courtesy, without exaggeration. She knew that half of them were there for prestige, not for the cause. But that didn't affect her. She also knew that even the opportunistic presence of some would serve the NGO. And that was enough. She had learned, with pain, that you cannot expect purity from everyone, but you can take advantage of even the vanity of others. The background music was discreet. A string trio played something soft in a corner. The bar was serving sparkling wine. And on the screen, images of the NGO were projected. Photos of women rebuilding their stories. Children smiling. Renovated shelters. Schools under construction. It was the most important night of Ilara's public career. The most visible. The most symbolic. But not the most difficult. The difficult nights were silent. Nights without dinners, without cameras, without beautiful dresses. She knew it. And that's why she didn't flinch when she saw Julian. He stood on the edge of the room, in a dimly lit corner, like someone who had come in uninvited. His suit was ill-fitting, his face was dejected, and his gaze was different. He looked smaller, thinner, as if time had passed him by more quickly. He carried a bouquet of flowers in his hands, and a plea in his eyes. Ilara didn't stop walking. She continued to greet guests. She smiled at a diplomat. She talked to a journalist. She served her son a glass of water. All with calm, with elegance, with control. But deep down, she knew. She felt it. Julian wouldn't leave without approaching. And he did. He waited for the first intermission of the night. When the musicians took a break, when everyone was busy with their glasses and comments, then he crossed the room toward her. She saw him coming. She didn't move. She didn't step back. She just squeezed her son's hand more firmly, and he immediately perceived the weight of that gesture. Julian stopped in front of them. His eyes were moist, the face of someone who has nothing left to hide, because he has already lost everything. "Forgive me, Ilara," he said in a trembling voice. "I beg you, let's start over. For us. For our son." Ilara didn't answer right away. There was silence all around. Not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel inside. The tension was thin, sharp. She looked at the man in front of her, and for a second she saw flashes of the past, the apartment where they lived, the party, the rain, the impact, the hospital gurney. But she also saw who she had become. The path, the blood, the rebuilding. And she understood that there was no new beginning with someone who was her end. She took a deep breath. She took a step forward, just enough to look him in the eye. Without fear, without anger, without debt. "You don't deserve my contempt." The phrase came out clean, direct, without needing to raise her voice. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't begging. She wasn't justifying. She was just telling the truth. Julian lowered his gaze. He tried to say something, but his lips only trembled. The bouquet fell to the floor, and no one bent down to pick it up. Ilara turned to her son, who was looking at her with eyes too mature for his age. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. She took his hand tightly, and together, they walked away from that scene. "Come on, son. We have a world to conquer." And they left. The dinner continued. The guests toasted again. The music started playing again. But something in that room had changed. A presence had dissolved. A past had been returned to its place. Ilara didn't look back. She knew the cycle had closed, that this was the last piece missing to seal everything that tied her to what was once pain. Now, she was another woman, and he was the son of a woman who was impossible to break. The final dance, the night was already well advanced when Ilara left the main hall. Guests were still milling around the tables, some toasting, others taking photos. The music was still low, filling the air with a breath of elegance and repose. But she needed air. She went out the back, walking to the garden. She was barefoot now. She had taken off her heels halfway through dinner without anyone noticing. Her feet touched the damp grass, and her long dress moved with the light breeze of that clear night. She stopped by the fountain. The water made a soft, constant sound, like a quiet breath. She inhaled deeply and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. She closed her eyes for an instant. The night seemed to extend around her like a calm embrace. It was strange to allow herself that silence without guilt, without fear that it would be interrupted by pain. For the first time, silence was just that. Silence. Not absence, not abandonment, not rejection. It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, without urgency, without threat. She turned slowly. He was there. Tall, in a dark suit, his hair slightly disheveled like someone who doesn't care about appearances, but still pays attention to every detail. The smile wasn't broad. It was contained, respectful, confident. And his gaze didn't say, "I want you." It said, "I see you. May I have this dance?" The phrase came with the simplicity that only true things bring with them. There was no forced gallantry, no rushed desire. It was just an invitation. Ilara hesitated. She looked at her own feet. She remembered everything she had been, everything she had survived. She thought about her tired body, the invisible marks, the heart she had mended alone, with pure courage. But then she looked at him, and she saw something she didn't expect. It wasn't salvation. It was presence. She breathed, and she extended her hand. "Yes," he approached unhurriedly. He put one hand on her back, the other held hers firmly, but gently. They began to dance right there, between the sound of the fountain and the distant murmur of the party, without music, without rehearsal, without promises. The dance was slow, almost motionless, but alive. She felt the rhythm of his body, the discreet warmth that emanated from that contact, the security of someone who doesn't try to dominate, but to accompany. And she let her feet slide without fear. As they swayed gently under the garden lights, Ilara looked back into the hall, through the glass. She saw her mother sitting, with her grandson in her arms. He was sleeping peacefully, his face resting on his grandmother's shoulder, his hands loose, his eyelashes long like hers. "He was my beginning," she whispered, without looking away. The man didn't ask anything. He just squeezed her hand tenderly. She looked at him again. "And now, I'm starting to live for myself too." This time, his smile was wider, but still contained, as if to say, "I understand. And I'm in no hurry." They continued to dance in silence. She didn't need to know his name yet, or his past, or his intentions, because for the first time she was dancing because she wanted to. Not out of fear of loneliness, not out of a need for acceptance, but because she felt she could. Time stretched in that dance, and Ilara understood, without anyone explaining it to her, that some songs don't end when the melody fades. Some dances continue inside you, and others only begin when you learn to choose who to dance with. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew who she was now, and that was everything. Questions for the reader. How does Ilara's journey from victim to a giant redefine what it means to be a hero in a story? What is the significance of the unspoken waltz with the new man, and how does it contrast with her relationship with Julian? The story suggests that Ilara's fall was not her end, but her beginning. How does this theme challenge conventional ideas about failure and success?